What's up again, everybody? So the Calling Dallas-Fort Worth has come and gone, and now we're all setting our sights to the Calling Cincinnati, and then of course the dual epicness of the Calling Orlando and the national championships of the U.S. Orlando. And with all of our sights kind of going to those, I want to, before I shift my own sights to those as well, I want to kind of give an impression of my experiences from the Calling DFW. I want to kind of talk about what I saw, what I really enjoyed, what I expected going into it, and if it's exceeded my expectations in any way. And then I want to tell you perhaps the one thing that really stuck with me from that event, and you may not kind of guess what it is, but I think it's worth talking about. So I figured I'd make this video because really I want to talk about that. But I'm going to talk about this first. So DFW is where I live. And I was really pumped when they announced that the Calling was going to have a DFW stop on this sort of circuit. And I was interested and optimistic. I was cautiously optimistic that it would be well attended. Specifically, I expected there to be a drop-off from Vegas. Because think about it. In Vegas, it's the first event post-COVID. It's Vegas, so it's flashy. It's a big deal. It's like glamorous, that sort of thing. It's got a premiere event attached to it where everyone's going to get to experience Tales of Aria together. The professor's going to be there, and that's a huge deal because everybody knows him. He's a huge YouTuber. There's going to be a bunch of other YouTubers, myself included, that are going to be there, so you might want to go and talk to them. And then there's some just blown away fantastic professional cosplayers that did just a killer job. So all of these things put together led to a very highly attended event, one that I expected to be incredibly successful, and it was. And I expected there to be a bit of a drop off from that to the Calling Dallas-Fort Worth. And I was building up to the Calling Dallas-Fort Worth. I was prepping by playing in sealed events or doing my own sealed simulations. I was playing in drafts prior to the actual event because I knew I was doing commentary, so I wanted to be able to provide accurate or insightful commentary, or maybe just entertaining commentary for the format, which was limited, which is fantastic. Love that. We'll talk about that in a second. And while I was going out and playing at events, I got the question asked a few times of me, what do you think is going to be the attendance, and what would be a successful amount of people, if that makes sense? And I always answered the same thing because this is truly what I thought. I always said anywhere between 400 and 500 people would be a success because of all of those things I mentioned earlier. Those things are not necessarily going to show up at this event, or even at the Calling Cincinnati, things like that, right? And so I expected there to be a drop-off, and I just hoped against hoped that we would see 400 to 500 people in the main event, because we saw 900 people in the premiere event for drafting, or sealed pool Tales of Aria when the set dropped. And so I was kind of just hoping that we would get around that 500 mark for the actual main event. Because I think that it was 750 for the main event for Las Vegas. I think it was 750. So that represents not too terribly much of a drop off overall. And I showed up on Saturday. I didn't actually get to go on Friday because I was working. So I showed up on Saturday, and I kind of talked with some people. I talked about what the plan was for commentary and coverage with the Channel Fireball guys, who, by the way, are absolutely fantastic people, and I love working with those guys. And then people started filing in for the actual event, and by the time that they finished filing in and getting everyone registered, there were 500 plus people. I think it was 502, or I think at one point someone even said 550. So I was absolutely over the moon by that number. I was really hoping that it was in that 400 to 500 range, and it turned out that it was. And that gives me a lot of excitement and hope for these kinds of events in these locations. Because, like I said, Las Vegas, glitzy, glamorous, people want to go there. It's a destination city. DFW, Cincinnati, and then other hubs that are hubs of communities, those aren't necessarily destination cities in the same way, but they can still be highly attended events. in their own right, and this one, in my opinion, was. So I really did think that that was a success as far as that's concerned. I'm hoping that we see a similar number for the Calling Cincinnati, which is like a couple of days from now. Literally, it's like tomorrow. Which is crazy. It's been a while since I've made videos because I get back from these callings and I'm just like totally wiped and behind on stuff, and so sometimes I take a short sabbatical. So thank you for bearing with me while I rested my voice, because I drank a lot of hot tea with lemon while I was doing that over the weekend. And then I think this is a big deal. I am very interested to see how huge the Calling / Nationals event in Orlando is going to be. I am very interested in seeing how attended Orlando will be. Not only am I interested in just like the numbers, I think it's going to be huge. And I think it's going to be huge because there's a Calling, which is open invite. There's a National Championship, which is invite only, meaning that only the people that earned Road to Nationals victories can actually go to that one, and that is very interesting. But it's going to basically draw two separate like groups of people that overlap a good bit, of course. But we're also starting to see other countries open up international travel as well. And if that continues over the next like week or two, then there may be some people from like other countries that decide to just show up and try to play in the Calling as well. And that could lead to some very interesting attendance numbers going forward, some very exciting attendance numbers going forward. I'm really hoping that's the case. I'm crossing my fingers that it's a huge event, because I'm going to be there and I want to see lots of people because it'd be fun. So that brings me to the coverage side of things. So I loved doing the coverage for this event. First of all, the more I've done these kind of coverage things, the more I start to appreciate on a deeper level what all goes into all of these events. And like this time, for example, I was just watching all of the judges just run around and just cover so many more things than what their title says, right? Their title says judge, but they're also like setting up, coordinating, switching out on shifts, covering for other people. It's like they're doing more than anybody really realizes, and I think we should all give them a ton of credit and kudos, because they are really cool. Those judges are really cool, and I appreciate what they're doing for the community and basically running the event from a ground floor level. They deserve a lot of praise and accolades and cool stuff for being judges. I want them to have like, I don't know, judge and employee gifts or something. I think that'd be pretty cool. Nevertheless, I was blown away by that. And then the coverage was so much fun to do because this was fundamentally a different format. You know, obviously Classic constructed at Vegas, and then we have Limited here, right? So it was Sealed and Draft. And if you have never played Sealed and Draft, maybe you didn't come out to the Calling DFW, if you've never really dipped your toes into it, you owe it to yourself to play this game in Sealed and this game in Draft. Those two formats, and the Limited format in general, is so well designed for Flesh and Blood. It is so incredibly well designed for Flesh and Blood. You can tell that Legend Story Studios made Limited a tentpole of their game because it is so different and yet so the same. It's so much fun because it's just a completely different experience building a deck and then playing that deck out with sort of unoptimal cards. And in doing so, you just have a lot of fun. And of course, the game facilitates this because you're constantly talking to your opponent about, like, do you want to block this? How are you going to block that sort of stuff? And so the engagement across the table shoots up when you're playing in Sealed because no one is bringing, like, the top tier meta deck when you're in Sealed and when you're in Draft. And so because of that, there's a lot more interaction, a lot more opportunities to like laugh about some random card that shows up in someone's deck. And it's just, it's a sort of a breath of fresh air coming out of the chain meta and into a limited meta that was a lot of Briar at first. And then an Oldham ended up winning the whole thing. And so I highly recommend that you go and check out and play the Sealed format and the limited formats in general, like Draft, because the game is so built for it. It's so built for it. And that leads me to the last 2 points, okay? The last 2 points. One, we had another control archetype win another calling. Oldhim, or Controlled Him is what I'm calling him. Controlled Him. I think I'm gonna coin that term. Join me in calling it Controlled Him. Controlled Him ended up picking up the entire event, and it's a control archetype that basically just blocks you all the way out and just, taxes you of all your threats. Prior to that, we saw Prism and Control Prism win the Calling Las Vegas, which blocked you out and taxed you of all your threats. And it taxed out Chains, which was crazy because like the last 2 or 3 turns of a Chain deck are just ridiculously explosive and oppressive. And yet Prism ended up winning that entire tournament. And then prior to those big calling tournaments, we saw, I think Matt Rogers was playing like a mid-range dash that had the ability to pivot to control. And he ended up picking the win up. I mean, control in this game is very, very good. It's very, very good, and I think this speaks to one of the areas that we as a community can, kind of attack and analyze and learn to be better at in a lot of good ways, and that's how do we look at control, how do we understand it, and how do we attack control? And that to me is something that I'm going to have a ton of interest in following and watching along, maybe with you. I don't know, maybe you are the one that like knows the answers to this. I'm going to be very interested to see this play out in like the classic constructed tournaments, the calling, the national championship, those classic constructed events, because I think we fundamentally thought that you can just attack, turn after turn after turn after turn, big threats every turn, and eventually they run out of like defense reactions and stuff to block with. And unfortunately, that's just not true. And we watched it be not true like multiple times over the past 2 months. And in fact, I specifically remember playing against Control and thinking that exact thing. I was like, I'm just going to present threat after threat after threat, turn after turn after turn. They're going to eventually run out of ways to block, and then I'm just going to present too many threats. They can't deal with it. And it turns out it just doesn't necessarily work that way. I mean, you may get lucky and you may pick that up, but by and large, it just doesn't necessarily end up working. And the reason is this, and this is conjecture, but I believe this is accurate. The reason is this: if these are your decks, like yours and your opponent's playing control, right? You have X number of giant threats in your deck. Okay, your deck isn't always made up of giant threats because you have to have resources and things like that in your deck. So this is your number of threats. Your number of threats will almost never exceed the amount of block in a defending control player's deck, because every card in the game essentially can block for some amount, 2 or 3. Every card has the ability to block for some amount. And that's not even counting control pieces like defense reactions or instants that buff defense, like Summerwood Shelter, which we saw do absolute work. And, for example, Oldham's control defense reaction ability, all of those things are way up here. Like, we have far more of those control abilities and block ability than you do threats in your deck. And so we have to think about a way to maybe not increase the threat in our deck, but a way to manipulate that side of things so that we can attack control in a different way. Because if we just think we're going to present threat after threat, then they're just going to 3-card block, pitch, attack us with like a weapon. 3-card block, pitch, attack us with spectral shields, right? That's what we've seen occur over the past couple of months, and I'm really curious to see what comes out of the woodwork to combat it. And maybe it's just a level of play going up. That would be interesting. Maybe it's one of the heroes that we've seen be successful just pivot a few cards. That would be interesting. It could just be like, hey, instead of just presenting these threats, we're going to play more of like a setup turns and then just drop a giant combo. I don't know which way it's going to pivot, but I'm thoroughly interested in seeing how it goes. And this brings me to the reason I wanted to make this video. The one thing that stuck with me more than anything else at the Calling Dallas-Fort Worth. And this one, I've been thinking about this a lot. I thought about it a lot today, and I was like, I'm going to sit down and make this video because I wanted to talk about this exact thing. So I'm going to paint a picture for you. It's Saturday. It's Saturday morning. there's like 500 plus people sitting down with their sealed pools. Sealed registration has just completed. People are waiting for the word from the head judges to like start building their decks, that sort of stuff. And so everyone's just kind of sitting around at the tables across from the person that registered their deck. And I'm walking around like the tables, just kind of looking around. Honestly, if you want to know what I was doing, I was really trying to see if anyone pulled a cold foil Corsham, because I just really wanted to know if like some random person just pulled a fable, like a cold foil fable. I really wanted to know. I didn't find anybody, but that's what I was doing walking around. And I see out of the corner of my eye, there's like a judge like leaning over this table, talking like at a low like body angle to two kids, like these two boys. They look like they were about 11 years old. And he's just like leaning in, talk. And so I kind of make my way over there because that was a bit surprising, right? I mean, it's Flesh and Blood. It's a 16 plus game, but here are some kids that are playing the game. They're both holding like their decks. And by decks, I mean literally just like a stack of, they're like literally just holding unsleeved stack of, their sealed pool, just like this, right? And I walk over and I'm kind of listening to what the judge is saying. He's basically like telling them like, yeah, so you've gone through and looked at your deck and now you can kind of pick one hero and you go through and we'll give you the tokens so you don't have to worry about, not having the hero on a card. We'll provide that for you. You just pick cards that go into your deck and cards that fit in your deck like card pools, and you go from there. Does that make sense? And then they said yes, and so he walked off. And I was just kind of I stopped for a minute, and I was looking at one kid. He was holding his deck unsleeved like this, and I noticed something on the very like front card, and it was like the card shined. It was glinty and glimmery, and I looked at it, and it's a cold foil legendary Crown of Seeds, completely unsleeved, sitting in the kid's hand like this with the other cards. And not only that, by the way, if you don't know, this is like a $250 card. Like cold foil Crown of Seeds just sitting there unsleeved like this. Not only that, the kid's literally squeezing his cards. And so like the middle of the card is like bulging. It's like going like, it's straight up a heartbeat of a card. It's literally bulging out. And my like first reaction when I saw he had that card, like he pulled the card and he was literally just holding it completely unsleeved, was like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like that card is valuable. You should put that into a sleeve. Like in my mind, I immediately raced to that. And then I caught myself for a second thinking, like a peculiar thought, one that I hadn't kind of thought in a while. And it's interesting, like, so we as adults playing this game, we admire the game for its investment capabilities, right? We can own a card, and that card might have value in the long run, right? We collect the game. You collect cards, you collect pretty cards, shiny cards, things like that, right? You collect the game. We play the game because it's a really fun game to play, but we come at it with a perspective of adults, because many of us are, right? Many of us are adults, and so we look at things sort of more of like a real world scenario. So in this moment, I was looking at things from an adult's perspective, like that card is worth X amount of dollars. You should protect your investment, put it into a sleeve immediately, and then set it off to the side. But the kid wasn't thinking that way. Like, not at all. And I thought for a minute, and I realized I used to do exactly what he's doing. Like, literally, I used to do exactly that. I'd have, like, a valuable Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh card. At least it was valuable to me. And I would take good care of it by putting it in a plastic bag and putting a rubber band around it with other cards. Or I'd put it in my backpack and I'd take it to school and I'd show my friends because it was super awesome and people needed to see that I had this cool card. Or I would put it in a binder because someone said you should put this in a binder, but like I wouldn't put it in a protective binder. I just put it in a binder. Like, kids do this, and they in this process, they may not be viewing this card as a collectible investment card, but they are falling in love with the card. And in that moment, I started to realize that. and started to think like a kid again, at least just for a minute, and as best as I possibly could. I went up to the kid and I was like, hey, congratulations on that card. You should put that into a sleeve. That's a good one. And he looked at it and he's like, oh, yeah. And then he immediately turned back and started talking to I think it was his brother that was across the table from him, about like, yeah, we're going to get tokens. They're going to give it to us for free. And I'm going to build this. And I just remembered, like, fundamentally, deep down, this is a game where you can enjoy and make a connection with someone else. And you can like cards and love cards and look at cards, and they're pretty and they're fun. And in that moment, I felt... I don't even know how best to put it. Flesh and Blood will be successful because of kids making that experience happen. Because of kids having that experience of like playing with their friend or their sibling, having a pretty card and just treating it like trash, but in the best of ways, in the way that like they truly care about the card. And maybe when they're older, they're like, maybe I should have done something differently. But they're having the childhood experience, and it's that childhood experience that will continue to, I guess, just germinate and grow, and will develop into another generation of players loving the game of Flesh and Blood. And it is for that reason that I think this game will be successful, because it is quite possible for kids to fall in love with this game, just like it is for us to fall in love with the game. And that's what stuck with me most. And so if someone asks me, do you think this game will be successful long term? My answer is yes, because of those kids having that experience at a large scale tournament, pulling a really shiny cold foil, maybe not realizing it cost a lot of money, because I actually didn't have one at the time, and carrying that card around in their backpack or something. And so that's the one experience that stuck with me more than anything. And I wanted to tell people. I think this game will be successful long term because of kids like that having experiences like we had this past weekend. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave me a comment down below on something that stuck out to you. Maybe if you attended the calling, then you can tell me something that you enjoyed about the event. If you want to support the channel, look, you can make that number go to that number. Literally one person away from hitting 6545. That number has absolutely no like extra value. It's just fun. It's just fun to hit the button and watch the number go up. So if you want to support the channel, you can do that. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.